I just read an interesting review in the London Review of Books by Tom Crewe of a recent novel by Ocean Vuong. And the review is a pan. Like a lot of intelligent pans, it's a lot of fun to read. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's always fair. Crewe does take the trouble to quote from Vuong extensively, and he does build a very convincing argument that Vuong basically overwrites and writes descriptive prose that is very frequently pretentious to the point of being a kind of word salad. However, sometimes I think Crewe is too severe. At one point, for example, he quotes Vuong as saying that a helicopter dismembered the air, which I think is a nice turn of phrase. So this is partly a question of taste. However, I would like to talk a little bit about this whole question of stylistic risk-taking, stylistic beltristic writing. And the first point that I'd like to make is that uh, there is a tradition of beltristic writing, obviously in gay fiction. One finds that, for example, in Jean Genet. I'm sure many people could ridicule the descriptive writing within Genet's works, but I think it works. A lot of gay writers have this sort of slightly purple quality to their descriptive prose, but it can work. It can capture something about this sort of world that feels alive, sort of with desire and so forth. Nevertheless, there is a lot of bad writing out there, and I think the situation has got worse over the past 30 years ago. It's not just the 21st century thing. And in Canada, it started arguably with, as sort of a vogue, it started with Michael Ondaatje and Jane Urquhart, both of who have been roundly criticized for their work, for the excesses of their work. But what's happened in the 21st century that I think is new is that there's a generation of people who have grown up not really reading a lot, and they have sort of lost the sense of what good beltristic writing is and is not. And there is quite a bit of clumsy writing out there. At one point, Crewe, in his review of Vuong's work, uses the adjective clumsy, and it is the right adjective. I subscribe on social media to a website, a Canadian website, that uses drop quotes from collections of poetry, short fiction, and novels. The drop quotes are usually quite painful to read. And obviously, the people running the website think these are great, examples of stylistically adventurous prose. It's clumsy writing. Um, Canada has tended to be, Canlit, has tended to be a little bit on the conservative side stylistically, but there are great stylists in Canlit, always have been, going back to the 19th century. And then before that, with indigenous authors, we tend not to pay attention to. For example, the Saulteaux people had a very beautiful way of self-expression in Lettres Québécois. They're great stylists. But overall, Canadian fiction has tended to be a bit on the sort of, it's tended toward realism. That doesn't mean that those writers are necessarily bad. For example, Margaret Atwood is quite a good stylist in some of her works. Surfacing, for example, is a great example of that. Alice Munro seems to be a realist, but is actually quite a good, interesting, descriptive stylist and does find le mot juste, quite frequently. My late mom was a good stylist. What I recommend if somebody wants to read her best work from point of style, uh, check out her collection, If Only We Could Drive Like This Forever, and the novella The Age of Unreason. My late brother was a great stylist. I'll link to some of his work below because he's completely unknown. Uh, However, for the most part, I think what has happened generally is that average people, including average readers, don't read words on the page as well as they used to, and what they tend to read, quote unquote, is movies, Netflix, and so forth. That's where I think the real sort of perceptiveness is coming through. That's also where a lot of good writing is these days. And I'm going to continue with this idea, this theme of writing, good writing, sort of shifting over from the printed page from the image-free printed page to the screen in another post.